And the guests from Ukraine. This is an immense pleasure for me to introduce Dr. R.K. Singh. Dr. R.K. Singh is the Vice Chancellor of ICFAI University, Dehradun. He has recently joined. Dr. R.K. Singh has completed his master's in engineering and has been awarded as postdoctorate by Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, Japanese government. He is also the recipient of Best Research Paper Award by Secretary General, International Water Supply Association, IWAA, 1996 India. He is also the recipient of Glory of India Gold Medal. It was conferred on him by International Institute of Success Awareness, New Delhi, 2012. He has also been given the Best Researcher Award and the Star Performer for the outstanding contribution and achievements in the past PhD research during the academic year 2011 and 12 at ITM University. He has over 150 research papers to his credit, and all these research papers are published in reputed peer-reviewed journal and conferences proceedings. He has authored 5 books. His introduction is a huge introduction, though we will, during the sessions, in the sessions to come, we will introduce him in detail. He is a lengthy and a lot of credits to his credentials. So may I request you, Honorable VC sir, to share your few words with us?
Yeah, actually, this is a great event having cooperation between 2 country and 2 university system. I'm very happy to see these things are happening in even this tough COVID situation. So without wasting much of the time, I wish that our students should get the maximum benefit out of this activity. And in times to come, we need to strengthen more our activities so that our benefit, so that our students sitting in Ukraine as well as in India should be benefited with each other. And such a lot of cooperation we should come up so that in the times to come, our tie-up is going to become more and more strong. Thank you so much for inviting me and being a part of this event. And please go ahead with the program.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Let me have this opportunity to introduce our today's speakers also. I would like to welcome Dr. Marina. She is Associate Professor in Department of Finance. She is also the Head of Scientific Society of Students, Doctoral Students and Young Scientists at the Kyiv National Economic University, Ukraine. I also welcome Dr. Professor Hana. She's also from the Department of Finance. She's also the Head of Council of Young Scientists at the Kyiv National Economic University, Ukraine. So over to you, professors.
Thanks a lot for such a warm presentation and introduction, but let us start with our lecture today. We will provide you a very interesting issue related to international tax competition and theory and practice. And we are warmly welcoming you in virtual room of Kyiv National Economic University, named after Vadim Getman. And what is the main question we focus on? The first level and composition of tax revenue for emerging markets. To understand which role are playing taxes and what basics of international taxation. Also, we put our attention on tax competition. Competitive and strategic behavior. Of course, tax competition related to tax-based mobility and efficiency of tax competition. That's why we look forward to this question. Internal aspect of tax competition is a fifth issue we will discuss, and the impact of international tax competition on some practical evidences, yes.
Countries, local and middle income countries, we will try to
show you
today.
Let us start. So with the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, we hope you know these goals. Yes, taxation has again taken up a certain spot on the international development agenda. So if we look through all of these goals, from 6 to 17, we found that fiscal reforms exist to reach all these goals. We of course, need to reform a fiscal part of government policy, and in a different way. For example, clean water and sanation, fiscal reform on water abstraction, subsidies, tax exemption. If you talk about the next goal, fiscal reform support renewable energy generation, also catalyze innovation and enhance incentives for employment, can increase incentive for PE, can mitigate social impact and support clean technology, can improve air quality, reduce environmental impact, reduce waste consumption, etc. And fiscal policy strengthen domestic resource mobilization.
And how to strengthen mobilization, and why we need different type of taxes in different countries, and what are the structure of tax system in these countries we at the moment can find on these graphs. We see that mostly all of the low and middle countries with resource-rich economies or non-resource-rich economies has the differentiation in the tax ratio. The average level of tax ratio, for example, in resource-rich countries is approximately 16%. And if we look into the non-resource countries, we will see that the level is approximately the same, but sometimes it's the level is lower. And what about the internal tax structure, the entire tax structure or the tax system in these countries? Of course, we can say that mostly all of these countries has the main source for budget mobilization is consumption taxes. The taxes on, for example, different types of excise duties or VAT taxes. And the last part of the budget revenues lays under the income taxes, such as personal income tax or, for example, corporate income tax. And
but looking down to resource-rich country, we could see the differentiation between these two parts. For example, indirect tax in this country are less important in case of structure of revenue mobilization
in comparison
with direct taxes like income tax, yes,
and that's why the policy agencies, the fiscal policy agencies in this country have put their intention on their different aspects of taxes when they provide their fiscal reforms just to enhance the level of tax mobilization.
So what is the aggregate tax gap, the theoretical ability to collect for all emerging countries? First, it depends on the transfer pricing. So miss a potential substantial amount of revenue through this type of collaboration, yes, between the affiliation part of one company. Important tax gap in developing countries is related to tax incentives. Yeah, the governments from low-income country typically offer various tax exemption. For example, aiming of attracting investor and fostering economic growth. Such fiscal benefits are widespread in developing countries. But if we look into rich advanced economies, we can find that no wide quantity of these tax incentives mostly present in the country with the developing market. And the major cause of revenue losses is related to revenues generated in extractive industries. And also this country face a number of constraints of political, administrative, and of course economic nature. Political constraints are related to the power relations around taxation, administrative constraints to the capacity of tax administration to enforce the law and ensure compliance, economic constraints to the small tax base the developing countries can count on.
And many countries' large revenue increase pursued revenue administration and tax policy reform in parallel, as well as we mentioned before, broadening the tax base for both type of taxes. As we saw on the graphs, some countries has preferred in their structure income taxes or direct taxes. Some of the countries, of course, has the most part of the revenue collected through their indirect taxes. That's why the policy should be, of course, aimed to solve the problems with all types of the taxes. Many countries focused on, of course, indirect taxation in their revenue mobilization efforts. If we talk about non-rich emerging markets, and tax administration reforms is a key of compliance area to provide more responsible behavior of taxpayers to satisfy the goals of the government and the goals of increasing the level of economic growth. And making conclusion, we see that all the countries has their own tax structure. Yes, and tax structure is differs and depend on the level of economic development, of course. But what is the international taxation? We come on this issue. International taxation refers to the global tax rules that apply to transactions between two or more countries in the world. But we have to note that taxes themselves are not international. Taxes, this is an instrument of fiscal policy for every country, and there is no separate global tax law, for example, and no international tax court, for example, or administrative body for international tax issues. All taxes are levied under the domestic law and of different levels of government, for example, by federal or national or local government, if we talk about federal structure. These tax laws have an impact on cross-border transactions, and international taxation governs these domestic tax rules under customary international law and treaties. And of course, that's why international taxation faced with such issues like tax conflicts and double taxation, double tax treaties, domestic tax system rules, international tax law, and international tax planning. As it's why we also have to put our attention on such peculiarities with which deals international taxation. First, the international efficiency. We should mention that all tax structure must be productive and efficient for the country. And yes, in sense of providing public goods and services. And efficient allocation depends on the mobility of factors of production. We should also remember about this, and that's why when we talk about there are different changes in tax policy, in tax elements for different taxes, we should remember, like a government agency, what we can provide and how our taxpayers will react for such implementations. Mm-hmm. And our previous slide told us about some effect, yes, with which international taxation deals, yes. And if we talk about the transfer pricing and cess policy, we look on this price adopted for bookkeeping purposes, which is used to value transactions between affiliated enterprises integrate under the same management at artificially high or low level in order to affect an unspecified income payment of capital transfer between those enterprises. Of course, we want to know the design of
indirect taxes, because the main countries covered their tax revenue through this type of taxation, and indirect taxes is one of the easiest way to mobilize, yes, the tax revenues for the budgets. That's why design of this part is crucial, important. And tax harmonization. Yeah, the harmonization represents a process in which all the tax systems, or all the policies find some joint way in the process of solving the international issues, for example, against double taxation with a special treats of double taxation, or some international declaration on different type of taxes, for example, for Euro Commission or Euro institution, or the country from Eurozone. It's more important to the regional union. Yes, yes, to the regional unions, more important to harmonize and to unify. Yes, unify the different aspects of tax policy. And of course, we should take our attention on the tariff policy and trade agreements in liberalizing trade. And the last but not the least point where we put our deep attention today is the tax competition. What does it mean, tax competition, and why tax competition is occurred? Of course, because of some special economic impacts of taxation on the behavior of taxpayers. These issues can be related to their behavioral aspects and their incentive to minimize the tax burden of the activity. And that's why first important seeing behavioral effects that could tax impact on, and financial effects. This is the second one, because the taxes is one of the important fiscal instrument. Yes, in case of providing quality of public goods and services and financing these public goods and services. The third one, organizational effects. The rules, tax treaties, tax law could and must be taken into account and must be clear understanding for the taxpayers, and even if taxpayers are non-residents in these countries, and announcement effect and capitalization. Course. Looking at the over 5th century, we could that the main issues, the main peculiarities, and the main prerequisites for international tax competition, of course, this is a globalization of economic and free access to different markets, to different countries. In this case, of course, we see that over 5 last centuries, the level of globalization rise rapidly. And at the moment, because of or due to the crisis of COVID, we also see the changes in the business activities, in the business models, and the activities of IT companies, digital business, and private persons such as households. They also use mostly their worldwide network internet to provide their activity, which of course absolutely free of borders. And that's why their tax government should take into account this factor when try to implement different changes in tax policy related to international tax. Because the one thing that occurs with this situation, of course, with the tax mobility or mobility of the tax bases, such as capital, labor, etc. And the consequences of globalization in terms of taxation, first one, political landscape has changed, yes, and the incentive for firms and customers for their choice of individual countries and the willingness to participate in international agreements depends only on these changes. Mobility of firms and questions about the design of an appropriate tax structure, of course, the main issue that appear with the globalization in terms of international taxation, and of course deals with the international tax competition and some changes in international tax law, and what key milestones was adopted through the last 30 years. Yes.
If we talk about the harmful international tax competition and their disadvantages of such a freely access to different markets and to different tax jurisdictions.
Like Dr. Marina mentioned earlier, the taxes is a domestic instrument, yes, fiscal instrument, and the main principle of taxation or canons of taxation is neutrality and fairness. And in this case, in 1996, G7 makes a problem of tax evasion and avoidance a priority. In 1998, OECD written the report about harmful tax competition, yes, an emerging global issue. Until the 2015, all of the main attention of the countries lays on development of international standards on tax transparency, yes, and in this case, in 2050, the OECD adopted the base erosion and profit shifting, the project BEPS, yes, and it consists of 15 actions to counter tax avoidance, and in 2050 they adopt action 1 that deals with the digital.
By the way, Ukraine, the country of Eastern Europe, has implemented some, or at first joined this BEPS framework in 2017. Until this moment, we of course on the different stages of implementing all of actions.
And the last 5 years, the discussion is around the framework on how to address the tax challenges of the digitalization of the economy. And over 130 countries and jurisdictions joined the Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 solution, yes, that helps countries to decide what type of business we can count like digital business, what
type of value
yes,
can be provided for this business, where this value is created, in which jurisdiction, and how we can tax this value, and why.
What type of taxes we have to impose in our tax system to prevent
unpredictable and deviative behavior of taxpayers. If we talk about this issue, of course, we have to understand that why it is so relevant for today's economy, because of if you look into the market price of the top 10
biggest companies in the world, we will see that in this top 10 list, we will find 7 IT companies and 2 companies
that related
platform with platform economy. But their markets for this company are also all over the world, and we clearly understand that to provide a purely competition in the case of taxation, we of course have to use different instruments that avoid tax evasion and tax avoidance, the different types of such activities.
So we want to put our attention on tax competition. Tax competition refers to the interaction among the governments due to inter-jurisdictional mobility of tax base. And tax competition consider with such thing as efficiency, of course, distribution and intergovernmental interaction inside country as well as outside countries.
Yes. And what are the main popular model of tax competition that are famous in the world? Of course, one of the model of this competition concerns with the size of the countries. If we talk about if comparing countries are equal size, they face similar incentives to cut taxes and suffer equal welfare loss in the non-cooperative equilibrium. It calls like a symmetric tax competition. And if country size differs, the smaller country faces stronger incentives to cut tax rates than the larger country and suffers less in the competitive equilibrium.
In this case, occur a symmetric tax competition. And if the difference in country size is large enough, the smaller country is better off under tax competition than in its absence.
And if we look into another type of classification of a model of tax competition concerning to domestic constraints, we should to put our attention that country pressures includes budget rigidities, inefficiencies associated with taxes on immobile factors and norms of equity and fairness, which make tax cut on the mobile factor difficult, because this jurisdiction can lose these factors in the way of open international economy, and of course their budget will lose resources for existing.
Yes, and it leads to lower tax rates in equilibrium. And how we can mobile tax bases in the real world, how sensitive do they react to cross-national differences in taxation? If you talk about consumption to taxation, cross-border shopping decreases rapidly with the distance from the border and has little influence on overall consumption patterns.
What are the main famous consumption taxes?
It's a VAT value.
Wholesale
taxes.
Wholesale tax in the United States, for example, or for
excise
taxes, different type of excise duties, yes, that levied on specific items of
production, or like additional sale tax cover the additional consumption of goods and services. And personal, if we look into direct taxation, personal income taxation, most workers cross borders in search of better jobs and higher wages, not lower taxes.
It does not matter for mainly all of their employees how many taxes they will pay. It's only matter which sum of income they could collect or earn from
in net sum.
In net, yes, in net volume.
Yeah. However, there is no indication of a major effect on general employment patterns. Presumably,
because the share of foreign professionals is so small. And how mobile tax base related to corporate taxation, the most popular corporate taxation, this is the corporate income tax, and of course it depends on the international tax arbitrage. Is a major factor that corporate taxation also put into account of governments, yes, when they try to change the rates for their entities. And summing up, we should to say that it is of minor relevance in labor income or consumption taxation, where only very selected parts of the tax base, such as, for example, high-income professional or highly excised goods, are sensitive to cross-national differentials. And what about recent empirical research shows that about the capital and labor mobility over the last year through the OECD countries. So the graph shows unweighted OECD average, yes, and there is an asymmetry between labor and capital mobility, while workers might be residents of the same countries where they work, capital owners may be residents or non-residents. It doesn't. Of course, if you look into the current statistics, maybe the situation changed because of the transfer from the real economy to the digital economy. And in this case, we have to know what does it mean, capital mobility or labor mobility. Capital mobility is the sum of total assets and liabilities in the percentage of GDP that should transfer from one country or could transfer from one country to another. Labor mobility is the sum of inflows or outflows of non-nationals from other countries divided by the total population of the country. Mm-hmm. And this graph, it was our one main issue to show you how big is the difference between the capital mobility and labor mobility, even if we do not count the impact of digitalization. Yes, the gap is huge between these two indicators. And in this case, of course, we should to note that capital mobility puts downward pressure on capital taxation and upward pressure on labor taxation. And capital taxation is less sensitive to capital mobility in net capital importing countries than for a net capital exporters. And labor mobility puts downward pressure on labor taxation with no market effect on capital taxation, and labor mobility has a negative impact on labor taxation, but a positive impact on capital taxation. And of course, when we talk about capital and labor, we should to know that the capital tax basis is a profit of company, and the profit of company, this is a source for investment. Their revenue or the wages or the income of personal incomes, it's mostly the source of consumption and less the source of investments. That's why when the government decide which part of their income should to be taxed more or less, they should take into account the possibility to pay principal, yes, and the investment possibilities of such type of income. That's why mostly all of the countries has a higher tax rate on personal income and lower tax rate on corporate income. By the way, despite of the changes through the last years due to COVID restrictions. Of course, the differentiation between the tax rates became lower, and the corporates, of course, should bear a more or a greater tax burden just to help in total view to recover the economy also. And if we talk about the internal aspect of tax competition, we would like to know that internal tax competition is mostly widespread in federal states such as Germany or Switzerland or Canada or Australia or Austria, etc. And the theoretical literature on tax competition generally finds that when capital is mobile, whereas land or labor or consumption is not, it is optimal for a benevolent government not to tax capital, hence to finance the provision of public goods only through taxing immobile basis. So the territorial nobility of the tax base arises if there is a higher the budget system imposes such tax, and the higher are prerequisites for centralizing tax revenues. And about the decentralization theorem and who shall be responsible in the multi-level governments for taxing different types of tax bases, of course, depending on the level of responsibilities of this government. And according to the theorem of we know that the tax competition between the different jurisdictions leads to the differentiation in the tax revenues of the budget of these jurisdictions. That's why a government need to use a financial equalization scheme to negotiate this problem. Yeah, and in this case, the centralization theorem or Walsall's theorem says for a public good, the consumption of which is defined over geographical subsets of the total population, and for which the cost of providing each level of output of the good in each jurisdiction are the same for the central or the respective local government. It will always be more efficient, or at least as efficient, for local governments to provide the efficient levels of output for their respective jurisdictions than for central governments to provide any specified and uniform levels of output across all jurisdictions. And that's why we have to sum up that financial decision-making responsibility for revenues and expenditures should be assigned rather to local governments and to central government. But the decision or the power, yes, of impose the taxes through different levels of governments depends on the cost of this type of public activities, of course. Yes. And what does the literature say us about tax competition in low and middle income countries? At first, low and middle income countries are more dependent on corporate tax revenues and a high volatility on corporate tax, with a high volatility on corporate tax revenues. If we talk about resource-rich country, in this case, of course, we should clearly understand about the level of mobility of tax base of entities' profits or incomes. In low and middle income countries, a high income count, and also in high income countries, the statutory corporate income tax rates have lowered, and the tax on trade have also been low through the decades. And the ideal response to harmful tax competition is far more difficult for low and middle income countries due to the different problems: reducing corporate tax rate, lowering the incentive for profit shifting, while broadening the tax base by removing exemption. Of course, is harder than in developed or advanced economy. National governments tend to compete on the international level for portfolio capital, profits of multinational enterprises, foreign direct investment, and of course high income jobs. If we talk about portfolio capital, we should mention that individuals shift some of their wealth in form of cash deposits, for example, equities and security holdings offshore, in order to avoid paying capital gain taxes. That's why, for example, in Ukraine, we have a strong negotiation process and reforming process, whether to implement this tax or do not implement in our domestic law. And all of the OECD countries and other countries that decide to impose this taxation in their law, of course, faced with the similar problems. Yes, profits of multinational enterprises. Corporations shift their profits from country with a high level of taxation or from the country with a high tax ratio to those where they can tax with a minimum tax burden. And corporate inversion is another way of the corporation relocate the headquarters to a low tax jurisdiction while keeping the business largely as before. And for example, if we look into the biggest IT companies, yes, and digital economy as a whole, we could note that their headquarters and the creation of value is a different part of the world. Yes, mainly the creation of value situated on the side of consumption of their products. Yes, for example, in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, and the headquarters of these companies are located in United States of America, China and United Kingdom. Foreign direct investment. This type of tax competition actually involves the relocation of real economic activity, and it's one of the crucial points to deciding tax or not to tax. Yes, and the last one, high income jobs, of course, for highly skilled professional and multinational employees. Them the individual tax burden is an important factor for migration, while those on below average income are not tax driven in their search for better jobs and higher wages. And what about consumption taxes, particularly VAT? What should the government provide? So, of course, this is the most important source of tax revenues in most African countries and other local and middle income countries. That's why the different types of fraudulent in taxation or tax or schemes of tax evasion and tax avoidance place under the possibilities of tax competition, of course, in such group of taxes. For local middle and income countries, of course, they are more dependent on corporate tax revenue, such as resource-rich companies. They should take into account the mobility of corporate income assets or corporate assets. And low and middle income countries try to make their tax bases narrower to prevent or to cut the tax burden on their taxpayers.
And data of 99 countries worldwide shows that 65 have cut their headline rate of corporation income tax by an average of 7% between 2006 and 2016, with the average statutory rate falling from 27.45 to 20.33%. A global tax revenue loss, approximately 1/3 losses relates to their local and middle income. And
countries.
if we talk about the globalization and IT company and the digital economy and taxation of this part of activities, the losses are much higher, approximately from 1 to 4% of global GDP. And measuring tax spillovers. Tax spillover refers to the impact of one country's corporate taxation rules and practices on other countries. So this is some effects that could be with this type of taxation. The researchers note that tax spillover effects have a significant and sizable impact in reducing corporate tax bases and rates. And 10% decrease in foreign affiliates tax rates increases the likelihood that corporations report their profits by around 3.5 in low and middle income countries, but only by around 1.5% in high income countries.
Yes, and we can know that mostly the process of hiding the profits by corporates or corporate institution is widely spread between the low and middle income countries. And profit shifting is more sensitive to corporate taxation than foreign direct investment. Yes. And can tax competition be harmful for local and middle income countries? The evidence of harmful tax competition has increased the tension on tax cooperation, tax coordination in the literature, with a primary focus on just taking harmful tax competition on mobile capital. Local and middle countries will only gain 1 to 2% of their GDP, while an overall 10% of GDP gains can still be achieved on domestic tax base.
I need to explain that harmful tax competition related to the tax policy belonging to offshore jurisdiction, preferential regimes, tax havens, etc.
And in this case, of course, we can see from this metrics that mostly all of the schemes of evasion and avoidance lays under domestic tax rules, not related to their international tax treaties in these low and middle countries. And why these situations occur? Because of capacity of tax collections, because of their low level of power, institutional power, because of non-mobile source of tax revenue, such as VAT, property, excise on tobacco and alcohol, etc., and lack of transparency, and of course the problems with rent seeking and corruption. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any question, do not hesitate, to ask us. And we hope that there were a lot of information, but the results of hearing this information from us will be beneficial for you. Yes. And now you can answer.
Thank you very much, Professor Marina and Professor Hannah, for such a wonderful session, very informative session. Students, if you have any questions regarding international taxation or anything, probably you can ask them. Unmute yourself and you can ask, please. I suppose it must be a little technical for the students because that's very quite informative and full of a lot of information in international taxation. Students, if you have any question, you can ask.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't hesitate of asking any question. Just for me, professors, if say, for example, is there any way out to avoid the double taxation in international context?
Please repeat your question.
Is there any way out to avoid double taxation in international context?
Yes, to avoid the double taxation in international tax competition, of course, all the countries provide the double or bilateral agreements. That agreements related to their shifting the different type of incomes and transferring the different type of incomes from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. Of course, a transfer pricing and the relation between the affiliate and control, and control entities. And if you talk about the double taxation, for example, how this problem can be solved when you are signed the treaty or the agreement to avoid this double taxation, of course, you like government provide for your taxpayers special conditions for taxing such income that receiving from the different jurisdictions. But you need to know that if you taxes that you paid in another country less than tax exist in your domestic or home country, you need to pay the differentiation between the level of paying taxes. And that's why this treaty helps to avoid double taxation, but not to avoid the differentiation in rates of taxation in domestic countries. Yes, between different countries. And in the case of digital economy, it raises great interest from the different politicians in different countries, how to avoid double taxation for such institution. If you talk about the profit receipt that this company could receive in different jurisdictions, and if they pay taxes, for example, for USA, and why they should to pay additional taxes for France, where they, for example, provide the activity. And another question is what type of activities they could tax, and in which country. For example, in case with the digital economy, it is very hard to divide, the differentiation between the value created in a country where this company are registered or outside this country where provides the activity. What is the main value? And how it could be estimated, especially when we can provide this activity through different platforms without any registration, without showing our transaction, etc., etc., etc. And of course, taking into account that previous this company didn't pay such taxes, and through the last experiences, they should to pay, and how it could be influence on the neutrality of activity of these companies.
Or neutrality principle of taxation.
Or, for example, the reaction of the country, home country where this company are registered. For example, global trade alert. Yes, if we talk about the
trade
restrictions
or tariff policy,
in the result of
in response of such additional fiscal pressure on their big IT companies, and digital companies.
Excellent, excellent. I think there was a student who wanted to ask question. Lavanya, was that you? You raised your hand?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Good evening, ma'am. It's a pleasure to meet you. Whether it's virtually. So my doubt is actually Raghavendra sir has actually asked partially like half of my doubt already. So it's about double taxation. And you've also, ma'am, you've mentioned that about tax spillover, right? So it's tax spillover and double taxation is kind of similar. And supposedly you're a country, when one country is trying to export and import goods from another country, usually often this spillover happens because they have two different types of rules, right? So how to avoid any rules? And you've also mentioned that there's zero profits by low and middle income groups and countries and stuff. So how to avoid such kind of situations? Because when it's a low income country, if they're being taxed a lot, then obviously that would be a very big loss for them. They want to avoid that such kind of stuff. So is there a solution for this kind of situation?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that the main principles of taxation should be fairness and neutrality. And if we talk about the special circumstances, for example, for low and middle income countries where the level of their incomes are low or on the middle level, their government authorities should take into account their benefits for the entities or for the taxpayers when they provide their tax changes. In the theory of taxation, we know about their tax shifting and we know about the dead by loss effect. Yes, and if we talk about the spillovers, it's the result of this dead by loss effect and tax shifting. Every taxpayer tries to shift their tax obligations or tax burden for another because of economic reasons. Yes, because of economic efficiency. And that's why in the case of such low and middle countries with a very weak institutional power, with a very weak level of, for example, judiciary, yes, and their rights, safety for the taxpayers and for the entities and for their households. It's very hard to avoid the situation in which their companies will try to avoid or to hide their profits because the non-formal rules in such type of economies
in widely spread. Because of the changing in different economic rules, political rules, etc. And that's why when these countries sign a double taxation treaty, they should to put attention not only the obligation that exist with a different country in trade treaties, yes, but the obligation between or before the residents of the country, yes, the citizens and the companies who are active in economic
and who creates the value inside the country and lets the economic growth.
And there are vast majority of spillover effects that exist after the double taxation, yes, and not only double taxation, but also with the new tax impulses or amendments in tax policies, etc.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you very much. So overall, you're saying that there's no real, escape from this kind of issue, right? Like a spillover effect cannot be escaped.
Also could be every time it should be a discussion between their authorities, between the governments who are responsible for providing fiscal policy and taxpayers. And this every time it could be the negotiation process and depend on the stage of economic activity, of course, and this level of income, the possibilities. And also we have to tell that not only the domestic government, but also the international institution have to take into account such problems, and they have already done such activity in case, for example, of BEPS implementation or joint audit implementation or different direction of transparency, or reversible taxes implementation in a case of VAT evasion schemes with the missing traders, etc., etc. They use different instruments, just trying to avoid to fighting with negative or deviative, negative spillover effects.
Understood, ma'am. So negotiation is the only way out of this. That's it.
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much. That was very insightful. Thank you very much, ma'am. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much for your question.
Students, is there any question? Alternatively, you can also write that in the chat box if you find any difficulty in asking it. It will be great if you clarify all your doubts. What's the point of keeping your doubts in your mind once you have the best experts to clarify your doubts regarding international tax? Okay, so I think they might not have any question as of the now, but probably if they share any queries with me, I'll divert it to you. Probably I would request you to reply that. I'll route it to you through Dr. Yelena. So I think with this, I would like to take this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks. Formally, I'm really thankful for to our top management, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, who has recently joined us, Professor Dr. R.K. Singh. I'm thankful for our registrar, sir, for extending always help and whatever resources we might be needing probably for different purposes. And of course, this is one of them. And I'm also thankful to today's expert speakers, Professor Dr. Marina and Professor Dr. Hannah. And my sincere thanks to Dr. Yelena, because it would not have been possible to sign this memorandum of understanding between two universities without cooperation and guidance and help of Dr. Yelena. My sincere thanks to the students, participants who have joined the session, which is very insightful. I also would like to thank to my IT team who made it possible, who scheduled the meeting, and throughout the meeting they were present and they made it possible for hassle-free interaction between the faculties from Ukraine and our students. So thank you very much, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attention, for your warm words, and for your warm hospitality in a virtual walls, and for the interest of your students in such not easy but very important issues. Yes.
Yes, correct. VC sir, would you like to share your views?
Yeah, nice hearing you. It was such a exhaustive presentation and a lot of participation from the students. I'm able to see more than 100 students participated the event, and it was very informative, very useful. And apart from that, we can have a cultural exposure with each other. That is also important. These things will go long in the times to come. We can have such lot of activities which will be mutually benefited for all of us. Thank you so much.
And sir, this is an experiment today that we have two resource persons delivering on the same topic. And so it's a really unique and innovative way to deliver on the same topic. I was under impression probably you will have two separate parts for your presentation. And one part will be delivered by Dr. Marina and another part will be delivered by Dr. Hannah. But this was beyond my expectation that the same presentation can be delivered by two faculties like this. So it's a nice experiment. We would like to take it forward.
Because of a long and strong experience, between the twins.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So thank you very much, everyone. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.